how do you assess the current situation with the state ownership policy in Ukraine?
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, I'm not ready and prepared to speak on behalf of the government. I'm not a member of the government, and especially I'm not ready speaking in this area on behalf of the government. Why? Because from the beginning, I was very skeptical regarding possibility and efficiency of the government policy in state-owned companies. And from beginning, I was convinced deeply that the best solution is minimize as much as possible state-owned sector and to solve this problem by privatization. Of course, transparent, open, professionally managed privatization. And then focus, of course, then we have to focus how to solve the problem in these minimum companies. After spending here now around 4 years, I am even more convinced about the importance of this and about illusionary kind of plans that we can effectively manage state-owned companies. Let me give you a few figures which are, I think, very important because finally, but I have to start by saying that in many areas it was done during the last 4 years a lot. Unfortunately, we are now speaking about area in which it was almost no result. I agree with Mr. Pyshny that yes, there are results, especially in banking sector, thanks to National Bank, new rules, supervision, and so on. Related party crediting and all these issues, increasing capital. This is really achievement. But speaking about results in or other state-owned companies, I'm afraid. Okay, we have few examples where the independent supervisory boards were established, but still privatization is not going on, which means this real solution is not. We have new law. Fortunately, now process was started, but we lost 4 years. Why it is important? Because by last decision of the government, it was passed this triage, which means how many companies will be privatized. It is only 9% of assets of the companies which are in triage, designated for privatization. At the same time, it is agreement here, and even those who are against privatization are saying yes, state-owned companies are a huge source of corruption, political clientelism, inefficiency, and so on. Which means, if we want to privatize only 9% of assets, then we are saying that we are doing a real solution of this problem only by very minor part, 9%. Because speaking about corporate governance principles, OECD for instance, it is nice. But it is necessary to know that this is potential problem everywhere. That the risk of inefficiency and not only corruption, but also corruption and inefficiency is simply higher. And then we are speaking about specific Ukrainian conditions, which are not only Ukrainians, which were in my country, and I'm speaking because my own experience. When I came to power, and I was in 4 governments, we quickly recognized that the really only solution is privatization. And we privatized what was possible to privatize as soon as possible. Because one of the problems is, and it is not possible to underestimate, that for functioning effectively, like in Scandinavian countries, OECD principles of corporate governance, you have to have very well functioning formal and informal rules. Rule of law, low corruption, very high standard of public administration, very long-term transparent environment. Don't forget that in Sweden, for instance, Freedom of Information Act was approved in 1773. 1773. Which means I am convinced that yes. And then we have also a problem which exists also in publicly traded big companies, and it is from economic theory well-known principal agent problem. It is information asymmetry and motivation asymmetry. Those who are running the company, especially if we are speaking about big companies, those people have much more information about those who are controlling them, either owners or representatives of state as owner, which means they have very information asymmetry, and also motivation is not the same. Those who are running this business and those who are owners or representative of owners. And if you are speaking about state ownership, of course, it is also even bigger problem, especially in conditions which are like they are in Ukraine. Which means, in my opinion, very important is, and then my answer to your question is that I really don't know. I really don't know, and because in principle, I'm supporter of limited government. And in principle, I don't think that it is good in principle to have to ask bank to fulfill some social functions. Why? I understand that in ATO there are conditions, or in small regions where commercially it will be not maybe done. But it is very easy to just outsource this, to just order on commercial basis from the state to commercial, fully privately owned banks to fulfill this. And you will have competitive conditions, you will take better conditions, I think, and you will not create problem of conflict of these functions in one state-owned bank. Because then it is easy to say or to apologize, potentially, I'm not speaking about any concrete bank, but to say, okay, we didn't have such kind of profitability because we had to fulfill also these social functions and so on and so on. Which is speaking about banking sector, I don't see any reason to have state-owned banks. In Slovakia, we privatize all banks. In Estonia, they privatize all banks. And when financial crisis hit in 2008, 2009, we didn't have any problem with this. We didn't spend no euro, either nor in Estonia nor in Slovakia. On the contrary, Slovenia, which has still a lot of banking sector, but also other companies state-owned, they had a lot of problems. They had to spend a lot of money for covering, for sustaining these banks, and also corruption problem is there much higher in connection with these state-owned companies. Which means, very briefly, my strategy could be in this area to privatize what is possible privatize, and it's possible to privatize almost everything. But for Ukraine to have possibility to privatize much more, it will be necessary to restructure such companies like Naftogaz and Ukrzaliznytsia, to stay in the state ownership only what is natural monopoly. What is natural monopoly controlled by independent professional regulator and open market also for other private companies or other companies to use this natural monopoly and to create competition. And this is not theory. This is what we did in Poland, what we did in Slovakia, and other countries. Because without a restructuring and privatization of these companies and banking sector as well, you will have this situation that we have, which is very strange. Ukraine has 3,500 state-owned companies. About half are non-functioning, but still it is about 1,800. And when we tried to find some candidates for big privatization, so-called large privatization, which means big companies which can attract really strong strategic investors, we couldn't find 10. Finally, we found 5, but even this was the problem. Which means, sorry that I am not speaking mostly about corporate governance of the state-owned companies, but this problem is very important. Because if we are concentrating, Ukraine has a lot of problems. It is necessary to concentrate on the most important decisions and most important reforms. And among most important reforms, I am fully 100% convinced is privatization, but not 9% of assets, but restructuring and privatization of the most important part of Ukrainian economy, which is still in state ownership. Banking sector, utilities, and other important companies.
In other words,